I realized that when the hit of It Must Be Him happened, then my dad, and now we're talking about, I'm like 26 years old at that time, and he says, okay, you could quit now and you can get married. And I realized, and I had never spoken back to my father or out of respect.
Sure.
We just didn't do that. But I had to stand up for myself, and say, no, Dad, I'm not going to stop. I love this.
There's a great, big, beautiful tomorrow shining at the end of every day. There's a great, big, beautiful tomorrow, and tomorrow's just a dream away.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another encounter with some groovy moments from the past. We're visiting the 60s with host Dick Scapatoni, whose pop group Harper's Bazaar had a hit record back then called Feelin' Groovy. He'll be talking with our guests about a decade that shaped a whole generation, not only with the most magnificent music ever made, but also the politics, protests, and pretty much everything that happened in the swingin' 60s. So Dick, who's on today's show?
Thanks, John. In her illustrious career, she garnered 4 Grammy Awards, including a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Recording Academy, and has released over 60 best-selling recordings. She has performed for the Queen of England, 5 United States presidents, wartime soldiers in Vietnam, and sold-out audiences around the world. Who are we talking about? Well, it must be her, right? No, actually, it must be him. That's Vikki Carr's million-selling gold record. Vikki has worked in radio, television, film, and theater, and her music embraces 4 languages. She's among the first artists to bridge the cultures of the United States and Latin America, paving the way for many performers today. We're talking with Vikki Carr in just a moment.
Tell myself what's done is done. I tell myself, don't be a fool. Play the field, have a lot of fun. It's easy when you play it cool. I tell myself, don't be a chump. Who cares? Let him stay away. That's when the phone rings and I jump. And as I grab the phone, I pray, let it please be him. Oh, dear God, it must be him. It must be him, or I shall die. Or I shall
If I were to conservatively estimate the number of times I've seen the movie Moonstruck with Cher, it would have to be somewhere between 15 and 20 times, which means that I've heard It Must Be Him at least 50 times. Actually, I heard it a lot more than that back in 1967 when it was nominated for 3 Grammy Awards. The song was made famous by Florencia Vicenta de Casillas Martinez Cardona, although we know her as Vikki Carr. And one of the things I got to ask Vikki about today is when she guest hosted The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson in 1973. She was also a frequent musical guest on major network variety shows, including Dean Martin, Ed Sullivan, Perry Como, and Carol Burnett. But we're not here to just talk about the past. As a humanitarian, Vikki's list of accomplishments is equally as impressive. Her commitment to education and leadership development for Latino youth extends throughout her career. She established the Vikki Carr Scholarship Foundation, which is based in Texas and offers scholarships to Latino students who want to pursue their dreams of a college education. So far, more than 300 scholarships have been awarded to students attending the nation's leading universities. We've got lots to talk about. So, Vikki Carr, welcome to America's Oldies But Goodies.
Well, thank you, Dick. It's a pleasure. I mean, it was everything you said. I kind of got tired already, and I'm going, good
Right.
grief, Alice.
Yeah, could go on and on.
Right.
Yeah. A lot of stuff there, a lot of stuff to talk about. And then, of course, for our listeners, they'll probably hear this maybe in, I'm going to guess, maybe 3 weeks, which will be somewhat after the fact. But you're like 5 days after Hurricane Harvey, and you're I think you're near San Antonio.
We are in San Antonio.
Oh, okay.
So we were spared that, in the area where we are, but there are others that were in the San Antonio area that really got a deluge over the weekend. Pretty much we were advised by, the mayor and all this and that to just don't go anywhere this weekend, just stay in.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of wind, but for us in particular, we didn't get all that much rain. And we were very lucky compared to other areas, and especially Rockport and Houston, Texas. That it just is so heart-wrenching and breaking, so a lot of prayers are going out to those.
My guess is, I think as of today, Houston is approaching 50 inches, so who knows what it's going to be like a week from now. But anyway, as I've been listening all along, that whole scene is pretty scary down there. But I'm glad to hear that you guys are safe and the rain is not going crazy in your area.
Mm-hmm, right.
I have to say, San Antonio, it just occurred to me, I'm going to go back to, I'm going to call it 1967 or 68. Harper's Bazaar, which was the band that I was in, played at the San Antonio Hemisphere. Do you even remember the Hemisphere?
Oh my gosh! Of course, I played Hemisphere in '68.
Okay, so that's when we played it.
My gosh, we were there on the same year, and actually, Hemisphere played a big part in my future. Little did I know, I loved San Antonio, and in walking around and all this with, the mayors and all, and I said, I really love San Antonio. I would love to live here one day.
Ah.
Well, careful what you say,
Yeah.
because it's been 24 years of living now in San Antonio, completely, for me, uprooting from California, where even though I was born in El Paso, Texas, I was raised in Southern California. It was one of those things of you watch what you say because it may come to...
Sure, that's true. Well, you were talking about Southern California. Let's go back before your successful time in the music business and just talk about what was going on before all that happened. You were at some point living in California?
Yes, I was raised in California in the San Gabriel Valley.
Okay.
And I went to school there. I started in a Catholic school, and then was shocked going to a public school in 6th grade, and then high school. Came from a family of 7, of which I'm the oldest, and a very strict Mexican-American family, and especially being a girl and being the oldest. I was raised with 3 brothers, so of course I was the tomboy and had to play all the sports, but I was also, this was funny, I was born left-handed, and my mom, of course, at that time, they didn't want their kids, I guess, to be left-handed, and she used to tie my hand behind me, and it made me, in a way, in sports, ambidextrous, so I quarterback with my right hand, which I did on The Tonight Show, and then I pitch left-handed, and as a catcher on first, I would catch with with the whole hand, of course, but I would throw with the right, so I was really all mixed up. Or I could say that I was able to utilize and use both sides of my brain.
Okay. All right. Good. Well, you're the long version of your name is absolutely beautiful, and as is the short version. When did the name Vikki Carr start for you? What were you called in school?
I was called Florence. Because, the anglicized, let's say, Florencia is Florence, and it was just Florence Cardona. Mm-hmm. Although my birth certificate says Florence Vicenta Cardona.
Okay.
And the reason for all the names is, in this Latin family in particular, I'm not saying all of them, but you kind of give credit to everybody.
Okay.
Of why you're here. Like my grandmother on my father's side is Casillas, and so it becomes Florencia Vicenta de Casillas on my dad's side, and Martinez is my mother's maiden name, and then the Cardona, and then of course now I'm married to a wonderful man who is a doctor, Pedro de Leon, Dr. de Leon. So now it's Florencia Vicenta de Casillas Martinez Cardona de Leon de la Mancha.
I like that. I like the last part, de la Mancha. That's neat.
Right. And then I would do a flamenco stand-up on stage when I would go through the whole thing. But when I was going to school, then it just came down to Florence Cardona. But it was something to kind of utilize, unbeknownst to myself, in my show, and because actually when I first started, I don't know if you had that information, I was 18 when I went on the road, and I started with a group in Palm Springs at the Chichi Club there. And my name at that time was Carlita. Now, my father, who was so strict that I could not go out, but he told me, because he loved to sing, that anything that had to do with music I could do. So I took every music class that there was, Dick, choir, glee club, the madrigal singers, and then I took drama, and I was very involved all the time. And my father would say, "You're always gone at rehearsals," and I'd say, Dad, it's music, it's music.
Would you say he had more than an extraordinary influence on you? Let me tell you why I ask, because I talked to Connie Francis, I want to say maybe 3 weeks ago, and her dad was the whole ball game. I mean, he had total influence over her.
Well, of course. My dad wanted to be a singer.
Oh.
And at one time, he had spontaneously wound up singing for General Pershing at a fiesta that they had in San Gabriel. And there was a woman there who loved his voice and went up to him and said, "I would love to manage you." And my mom says to my dad, "No." And I think she was very wise, actually, because there were already 4 children.
Okay,
And then my dad was in the Navy. And so I was kind of pushed. Not that I didn't love it or enjoy it, but in my career, I realized the dream my father had for himself.
Yeah.
But it was interesting. I traveled, I was 18, and you had to be 21 in those days. So what did my father do? He retyped, he forged my
Really?
my birth certificate so that I would be legal. So it was interesting working all the lounges in those days. I don't know if you went through it with your group, but working all the clubs in Nevada, all the lounges.
Oh, sure, yes.
Where in those days there was 24-hour entertainment, and you would have a gig or a job for about 5 or 6 weeks, and in particular, they would change it absolutely every week. And for me in particular, the only thing that saved me, I think, from all of these things of starting, let's say, at 7 in the morning and finishing at 6 to 12, and then 9 to 3.
Crazy hours.
Noon to 6. Mm-hmm. Was youth. We could do anything. We could conquer the world. The thing I have to tell you is if I if I didn't sing, I would die. And I know now, as much as my dad wanted it, like for himself, I realized that when the hit of "It Must Be Him" happened, then my dad, and now we're talking about, I'm like 26 years old at that time, and he says, okay, you could quit now and you can get married. And I realized, and I had never spoken back to my father or out of respect.
Sure.
You just didn't do that. But I had to stand up for myself, and say, no, Dad, I'm not going to stop. I love this. And I realized, as maybe some of the other performers, that this was what you were born here. This is for me why God put me here.
Yeah.
My job is to sing, to lift people's spirits, to maybe make them feel better when they have left than when they walked in. And I remember sometimes after we would finish, if it was ended up and it was a Sunday, everybody would go to church. If we finished at 7, we'd go to the 8 o'clock Mass.
Okay, yeah.
And it was great to have acquaintances and friends. It was a very close-knit group. And, of course, Vegas was, wow, if you make it to Vegas,
yeah, that's for
you
sure.
can make it anywhere. I mean,
yeah, that's true.
It's like saying Broadway,
Yeah, Vegas was a big deal, and I suppose you could say it still is a big deal, but it's a big deal in a different way. Now we're talking about how much it costs to actually mount a show. I'm trying to think. Celine Dion, I have no clue what she spends, but she's got to spend a fortune to mount a show there.
Yeah, but the good thing about something like that is she doesn't have to pay for it.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, if they build the theater kind of around her, but they do have very tough schedules, for those that are there. I think besides her, didn't Barry Manilow also have a long stretch, like,
I think
what do they call that? I think at the Hilton he was.
Could have been. Yeah, I'm assuming you worked Vegas back in the 60s. Do you still go there at all?
I had been there, when I recorded in Spanish, which was a godsend for me. I'm being very spiritual. God has His plan for you. Sometimes we go off and we veer, but some way or another, He keeps us on a short rope and just pulls us back in, thank heaven.
Okay.
Let's just take a moment for a brief musical interlude. We'll be coming back shortly, so stick around.
Guilty undertaker sighs, the lonesome organ grinder cries, the silver saxophones say I should refuse you. The cracked bells and washed out horns blow into my face with scorn, but it's not that way. I wasn't born to lose you. I want you. I want you. I want you so bad.
I remember the singing when disco music came in particular. I was with Columbia Records, and I had, at that time, because of the success I had with It Must Be Him, I had the strength or the power to be able to fight for an idea that I had, and I wanted to do an album all in Spanish. But at that time, I mean, I've had a lot of people tell me, Vikki, you were ahead of your time. Sometimes you kind of say, all right already. What do I have to do? Drag you with me, But I always did 1 or 2 songs in Spanish during all of my career. And then I also would explain to the Anglo audience what the songs were about, because I didn't want the audience to be kept in the dark about it. because it's like going to an opera.
Sure. You don't understand
and
a word.
You don't know what the heck they're
Yeah,
saying,
that's right.
but if you go to the Met or some other high-end theaters that have opera, they've got the crawl either on the sides of the stage or
Yes.
in front of you. In front of you, ideally, was the Met. So the only way that I could get the story out there was to verbally tell them what it was about. And at first, it aggravated me that who I was speaking to about it, who was the president at the time, I just said, how can you say it's a foreign language when it's the country right next door to us, when I am Mexican-American, when my audience, who was primarily Anglo at that time, was asking me to record an album all in Spanish because they told me it's so beautiful, you should record an album in Spanish. And I would ask them, well, is it going to bother you that you're not going to know what the heck I'm singing about?
Yeah.
And they said, no, because when Vikki Carr sings, you can understand.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I realized that music is the universal language. If you can make eye contact with your audience, whether they speak English or Spanish, and you're singing with your heart, and you smile, you win the audience.
Yeah.
I mean, and I was raised by my dad, who did a beautiful job, other than being very strict, with the golden rule, and it served me, I feel, very, very well throughout the world, because I treated people the way I would have loved to have been treated.
As I'm talking, I'm thinking about, you've worked with a lot of different people. Have any of the well-known people that you've worked with left a memorable impression on you?
Oh, well, the first one that comes to mind that was so crucially important to my career was Nat King Cole.
Oh, boy, yeah.
And I was working at the Sands in the lounge. And at that time, it was when they had all the grand exodus from Cuba.
Mm-hmm.
And
yes.
the waiters and the busboys and the captains, they were Cubans. They were the doctors. They were the lawyers. That the first jobs that they got were that,
Amazing.
And the Sands was the place, to perform. I mean, and this night in particular was Nat's closing night at the Copa.
Mm-hmm.
And they would let me in, the captains, and so I could see the show. And, oh, my gosh, I looked, and there was Sinatra, there was Sammy Davis, there was everybody or anybody who was anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody that was, well, I didn't know if that came out right, but you know what I was trying to say.
Yeah, of course.
Right. And so at that time, when the shows were over, everybody would then go into the lounge. And then the lounge at the Sands was a very, very popular place. So I went there, and here they all come, and they're in the lounge, and I get with a group, and I start singing, and I'm singing, and I'm singing, and nobody's listening.
Oh, jeez. Okay.
So I was so dejected. I mean, my heart was broken, and I was walking away, I remember, by some slot machines, and I felt this gentle tap on my shoulder. And I turned around, and I looked up because he was very, very tall. And I see this beautiful black, I mean, he was like almost ebony,
Yeah.
And with his soft voice, he looked at me, and he says, I would like to apologize for my friend. He said, maybe you thought no one was listening. He said, I was listening. He said, don't stop singing.
Wow.
3 years later, Dick, I was invited to participate in the opening of the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion.
Oh, yeah.
The music center.
Mm-hmm.
And here I am sharing the stage with a Lionel Hampton, Basie, Sarah Vaughan, Tony Bennett. I could not believe it. And unfortunately, that was when Nat went. He was the one that was supposed to be headlining it, and he got, I believe, all the talent together. And I would like to think that maybe he was following my career in a little way.
Mm-hmm.
And he sent me a telegram where he said, I'm so sorry that I cannot be there with you tonight. That he was so happy for my having said yes to participating, or something like that.
He obviously was tuned into you, or there would have been no telegram, or those are some really important memories, which leads me to a question I don't even have on my list. Have you already written a book, or are you going to write a book?
Oh, everybody's asking me. I started to do one, and I was in Nashville with a publisher and this gal that she was recording everything I was saying, and then something very tragic happened. Her son committed suicide, and somehow all of the tapes, everything were lost. So then a few years later, I had another opportunity, and I worked with the gal that came here to the house to kind of put my stories and everything into a story form for a book so that she could, present. But as I read her, what do you call it, when the first little thing that they're going to present to the publishers.
Rough draft,
It wasn't the manuscript per se, but it wasn't me, Dick. It was like, where's my humor? But it was like, who is this person that they're doing? And so that kind of discouraged me, and then I just put it aside. I mean, Sinatra was another person very, very important in my career, When he retired and he became a producer, I was honored to be invited to sing at Governor Reagan's inauguration.
Oh, yeah.
And here he was, and I was the only girl or female in a dressing room with Dean Martin, Jack Benny, Bloody Ebsen, and he's looking at me with a drink in his hand, and he's saying, he said, you sing good. And I said very humbly, I said, thank you very much. And he reiterated, going, wait a minute, I said good.
Yeah.
G-O-O-D.
Wow.
And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, she can spell too.
Yeah.
I didn't dare say it.
Yeah,
but,
right.
And then to have had the thrill and the honor of performing for Governor Reagan and then later President Reagan. This man was... But you're right. I've got to write these things down.
Well, you just might be surprised. I think it's normal for you to look around and say, well, if I can dictate this into a tape recorder, or I can find a co-writer or whatever. But you might be surprised, even if you try this for a week, you may decide to write the story yourself. Which is going to be the real story, obviously.
Yes.
You can get an editor after it's all done and, clean it up to whatever extent it needs to be. But this may turn out to be a fulfilling thing in and of itself. Not as a job, but just something that you need to do anyway, just because of, where you're at right now. Speaking of which, what has been the most challenging experience, either in or out of show business, that you've ever faced?
Oh, my gosh. What would it be? I guess, my dear, it might be not the fight, but the belief in doing an all-Spanish album.
Mm-hmm.
And had it not been for that Spanish album that I fought for, when disco music came in, they were dropping the artists from the labels. And when I had been told that the company could not work with two divas, and so he opted to stay with the other diva. And like I would tell my audience, and I'm saying this lovingly, I said, so he opted to stay with Barbra Streisand. Now, I'm asking you folks, what has she really done?
Okay, yeah.
But had I not fought for the Spanish album, then Mexico, Colombia, Mexico, or Sony would not have come to me and said, we want Vikki Carr because we know she can sell records.
Yeah.
I had never been told that by anybody in the record business because people still do not believe that there wasn't $11 million with It Must Be Him, because that was a worldwide hit.
Sure, yeah.
But that saved my career.
That sounds, as you reference that, I would have not have guessed at that, but this is obviously pretty close to home for you.
Oh, yeah.
Being able to, be yourself and insist on those things happening. And then all of a sudden the whole world around you changes, which leads me to the next question about this whole thing with the Vikki Carr Scholarship Foundation. What's going on with that?
I'm looking to kind of really phase it out. The thing about the foundation is that it was very small. It was more like family. And we got an opportunity, I got an opportunity to meet the students personally, to meet their parents. And there was no money that was ever paid out to any of the people reading those applications. It was all something that was done out of love.
Yeah.
And we were not a big, big foundation. But I have to tell you that these kids and the ones I have met afterwards, one is a Superior Court judge now, a woman, in the San Fernando Valley. In 1997, I gave a $500 scholarship to a young man, and I met this young man as an adult in Washington, D.C., where I was going to receive the medal from the Hispanic Coalition, and the president was there. But he comes up to me, and the other recipient is a young man, and he said, I have waited so long to thank you. So I looked at him and I said, thank me for what? He said, your scholarship that you gave me in 1997, he said it was $500, but it meant so much to have someone believe in me that I could do more.
Yeah.
And he was our first Mexican-American astronaut.
Oh, man. Wow.
I started crying, Dick. Oh, my gosh.
Jeez.
So when you talk about fulfillment and things that you've achieved, as the years go by, you realize that, and especially being married to the most wonderful man, and now that certain health issues have come up, where my priority was, and that to be with my husband. So many have thought that I had retired, but what I've been doing is a kind of a hiatus. And I'm doing a show, as you mentioned, at the Tobin, and it's called Vikki Carr, This Is Who I Am.
I like that, yeah.
All right, let's shift gears for a moment and listen to the music. What song would that be?
For the first time in my career, in my life, letting people know what really motivated me, what was the things that I love, besides music, everything, all kinds of music. But it's like my first love was big band and more jazz. And then some of the Vikki Carr first, like being one of the first pop artists to record the bossa nova music. And I'm written up, like in the books, the bossa nova in Brazil. And I never knew this until somebody from Brazil told me. And then also doing the country. I was one of the first pop artists to go to Nashville to record a country album, which was re-released. And for the first time in my life, I started collecting some royalties on things, on albums called Nashville by Carr and The Ways to Love a Man. And it's amazing to me when I look at the body of work musically that I've done.
Mm-hmm.
But you know how people pigeonhole you as only it must be him and only with pen in hand and this. So I want my audience to see this is who I am. This is what made up who I am, that I did summer stock. And then to get a little personal in my life and share some things that maybe might help others that are in the audience at this stage of our lives. And for me in particular, what this world needs is love. And we keep saying that, and it's so overstressed and this, but you show your love by your actions with another.
It's interesting that as you're talking about all those things, one of the things I've noticed, and I'll bet it's happened with you too, as we get older, we find less reason to do a lot of talking around the corners. We tend to get more to the point.
Exactly.
Because it's like we now have the permission. I can say, hey, I'm 72. I can say anything I want now.
Right.
It's really kind of nice. It sort of lifts it off your shoulders. You can talk about yourself. You can talk about the wisdom that you've gained, which leads me to what will be my last question. As I get older, I think more about my philosophy of life, which is a pretty big question today, but it wasn't even in my thinking back in my 20s. Would you be up for sharing some of the wisdom, including spiritual wisdom that you've gained over the years?
Well, spiritually, I have been that way since I was a little girl.
Mm-hmm.
I have had a perseverance which I never really thought of as a girl, as a woman. I remember in my first Holy Communion at Catholic school where my parents had to tell me, we're sorry, but we don't have the money to get your communion dress. And I told my family, I am going to make my first Holy Communion. And we took curtains. My dad's mother, she made me a veil out of that.
Mm-hmm.
I took an old flower girl dress that I wore in a wedding, and then my shoes that were very scuffed and all, I painted them white, and I said, no, I am going to make my first Holy Communion.
Mm-hmm.
So that to me was probably one of the first things in knowing that in this business or in life, you must persevere. And along the way, we meet roadblocks, be it your work in particular, like record companies, or your family. You can never let anything or anyone take away what you know in your heart you were meant or born to do. And that is why God put me here. This is my job.
Yeah.
This is why at 77, the songs that I am singing are from my very first album. And I have not, thank you, dear God, had to change the keys, Dick, for anything.
Really?
No.
You're lucky. I can't hit the higher notes anymore. Not that I'm singing a lot, but
I also had to do something, because when you're young and you open your mouth and it's a God-given gift. I acknowledge that. But we don't think about things like vocalizing or taking care of it. And because of the way I was raised, there were never any drugs. There was alcohol, but not alcohol to the extreme. You know, it was like to have fun or whatever, or to celebrate. And I genuinely had take care of yourself. And as you get older, I mean, I have exercised pretty much all my life because I have the tendency, being Latin and everything, that you can put on the weight. So what do? You discover you have to move. You have to move.
That's hard to do.
Well, it is, but if we don't move, what is it? If you don't use it, you lose it.
You lose it.
Right. And my husband is 87.
Oh, boy. All right. He's 10 years older than you.
Uh-huh. And he was a doctor for 58 years, working at times. He never would take days off until he got married. And he used to work 12-hour days. He'd get up at 5 in the morning.
God.
And he was an old-fashioned doctor. He did not take any appointments. Whoever was sick, he would see.
He was there, yeah.
And he saw upwards, at one time, 60 to 80 patients a day.
That's just amazing.
To the point of where younger doctors, and he was admired and respected so much, they looked up to him and said, "How can you see that many patients?" And he said, "Because I know what I'm doing." And he's had these patients for, he has had patients for 3 generations.
Boy.
I, in my music, have also reached that. It's like your great-grandparents, your grandparents, your parents, you know, everybody. And now you're the parents, kids that had kids, that it just goes on.
Yeah.
And I have been blessed to know that on Sundays in a Latin family, audience members have come up to me after the show or whatever, and they said, "We were raised with your music because of my grandfather or because of my dad."
That's got to be, that makes such a point. That just touches in. I've had that happen a few times. I know what you're talking about. You don't tend to reach back that far, and then someone tells you that their parents or grandparents, and that's really neat when that happens. I mean, it's an acknowledgement is what it is.
So it's perseverance. You fight for what you believe in. You listen to your gut, because that's God's way of saying, well, wait a minute, before you do this. I know I have ventured into things that I did not listen. And also to push what you believe, not push it to the extent of being obnoxious.
But state it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Sure.
Exactly.
And that's what I was saying. I think now as we get older, I don't have the reservations that I might have had before of having to say something that is firmly ensconced in a lot of, not excuses, but just a lot of fluff. Now it's easier to get to the point and just say how you feel and say, what you believe in. So speaking of which, any chance you're going to be performing in Northern California anytime?
Oh, that would be wonderful. What I'm trying to see, Dick, is now coming off of this hiatus, this show to me is very important. And for many, many, many reasons, which I really, it's not necessary for me to tell you about. Suffice to say that I am hoping and praying that this show will open the door, because this, in a way, when we're talking about my life story or in a book, with the anecdotes and photos and video, this is a big project I'm taking on my shoulders. But I know I may not accomplish everything that I want to do, because some of it is cost prohibitive at this point in juncture of the career. And so I know I need more work to be able to really put this out there, because this is another step toward the book, because the show will be recorded. Hopefully it'll be sold out, and I'm going to work on that, because We are from old school. If we want a show to be a success, we have to promote it. And how do we promote it? Those are the creative things that you start thinking about.
Yeah.
You're going to persevere. You're going to say what this is about, why people should come and see it.
Any idea on how many people you want in the band?
We're talking, it's been a long time. I want a full band.
I mean, you want strings and horns and the whole ball of wax?
Well, right now it's all orchestra.
Okay.
But I have mentioned to the accompanist now, I also want to have strings because the importance of music, I was listening to a homily yesterday that dealt with sacred music and how important all music is, that you have to share the beauty of that. So how can you share the beauty of an incredible arrangement by Bob Florence that when I would put those charts out for musicians, no matter where I was in the world, I got so much more respect. Because musicians took it as a challenge, and they would say, well, these chords are wrong. And I said, no, they're not. Let me finish singing it, and you see how everything just comes together. Musicians will say, whoa,
okay.
It does work, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, it does.
Well, if you've got any chance at all of actually having some live strings, even if it was like, 3 violins, live strings are just the ultimate. And as you know, of course, the real thing is the real thing. So what I'd like to do is, it sounds like you've got a lot coming up. I'd like to get back to you at some point down the road. I don't know, maybe.
Oh, I'd love that, Dick, because I also would love to know how our little visit went, and then at that point we'll see how the Tobin went.
Yeah.
And what challenges now do I have after that?
Let's you and I plan to reconnect at some point in the future.
Definitely. It's a date.
Okay, good. All right, you take care, and we'll talk again soon.
Okay, Dick. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, too.
God bless you.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
Same to you. Bye-bye. So until next week, keep your face in a smile. It makes everything worthwhile. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to America's Oldies But Goodies with Dick Scapatoni. Join us again next week for more memories from the good old days. In the words of Jerry Garcia, what a long, strange trip it was. The swingin' 60s. I'm John Berg. See you then.